Welcome back, everybody, to a non-Malazan video. Yes, I know you were expecting a Malazan video, but I've been a lazy son of a bitch and I didn't read enough Malazan today. I spent most of the time dealing with these CDs I spoke about, so I've been fighting my printer, fighting the post-service website, and all of that. But then, luckily, something happened. Daniel Greene's novella, Breach of Peace, dropped on Audible. So I went and spent one of my Audible credits on one of my Audible accounts to get one copy of that, downloaded it, and listened to it while doing my workout. So I can now rant about that book, or not rant because it's not that ranty, right? So this is sort of a kind of review thingy. I'm not good at reviews, so don't expect a rating. I already made jokes about it, but I'm not good with ratings. Value judgments are not my strong suit, which will sooner or later probably drive me and my record label into absolute ruin. But anyway, let's talk about what I think about Breach of Peace by Daniel Greene. Cheers. Alright, so I'll kind of make this like a two-part thing. So I first gave a spoiler-free, or as spoiler-free as possible, kind of thoughts on it, and then I'll, make a small break when I drink a little beer, and then we'll go into the spoilers and so forth. But don't worry, you'll get my main thoughts on whether you should go and read it or not, and all of that shit. You get that before I go into the spoiler parts. So here we go. Daniel Greene is obviously the fantasy YouTuber, and I've been often very critical of his critiques. I do enjoy the energy of his videos, and this is not like me critiquing those. I've been critical of the way he phrases critique before. So when he actually puts his money where his mouth is, although at this point with all the pre-orders, I guess the money is back and no longer in his mouth, or something like that, and actually writes a book, I feel it's a good idea to actually go and read it. And as I said, I spent an Audible credit on it, so I did not get a free review copy. I'm not sure if that makes me more biased or more unbiased. That's, I guess, up to you. But yes, so I did that, and I listened to it once. I'm sort of fresh off it. I have had like an hour to go to the supermarket and buy more beer and mull over my experience all the way. And I'm now recording this while I'm supposed to be on a video conference, which I'm sort of going to go back to in a couple of minutes, I guess. So, first thoughts, is it a train wreck? No, it's not. So if you were waiting for Daniel to fail spectacularly, to actually feel, qualified or justified to hate on his writing, I gotta disappoint you. It's not a train wreck. Is it the best thing since the invention of sliced bread, or in my case, beer? No, it's also not that. It's a solid first novella kind of thing that has the big advantage of it being as a novella, which is much easier to, write than a full-blown novel, because issues like overall like pacing or whatever are much easier in a shorter text. You can't even come to the point where everyone is walking to Mordor for hours and hours and hours. That just doesn't happen because you only have 150 pages, and if you do that, yeah, nothing happens. So plot is much faster and everything, and that makes it easier. It also makes it easier because you can't really fuck up your characters in any big way, because the whole thing doesn't have span that much time within the world. So you look at it and it's like, yeah, characters don't evolve in as that and change that much. They don't develop that much within a couple of days or a day or whatever. So that's also fine. So a lot of the issues that I feel a lot of young or starting authors sometimes have with longer texts are cleverly circumvented by just making it a short story, which is cool. The next thing is, it's something of a action crime novella plot. And those, I feel, are easy to write because there's enough structure out there that you can hang your story on and put enough, technical details of all these things on it to, make the whole thing work. It's easier. It's harder to fuck up a solid crime and action novella than, I guess, something exploring the sheer blandness and hopelessness of modern day life of soon to be divorced Americans. I mean, it's easier to make that one, the first one, interesting, and the other one, well, it's not even if the so-called masters write those things, they're interesting, but you know what I mean. Anyway, my point being, Daniel does a lot of things very right here because he goes and uses all these things to his advantage. He writes this, the whole thing is written very competently by following all these rules. I'm not going to say it's formulaic. Well, I'm not going to say it right now, but you know what I mean? It's well done. And this is my overall, I guess, if I would have to call it something, I feel it's something of a flintlock fantasy action crime movie. Well written as a novella, but you know what? The plot is very much that kind of thing. You have, obviously, at this point, and this is not spoiling anything, you have officers or inspectors, like law enforcement policemen, in a city that is somehow ruled by God, more or less. The world building is tantalizingly scarce in that regard. And they are trying to solve a crime. And then shit happens. And that works well. Once again, you can do all this police procedural stuff and go into those details. Once you have your plot thought out in your brain, you can then show how your officers go along, that kind of thing. That makes it rather, it's, once again, it's very difficult to fuck that up. Plus, Daniel can write engagingly. That's the other thing. The metaphors he uses sometimes, that kind of thing works well. It's not boring me. It's not the best thing ever written in the universe, but it's very solid. It's very solid. It's engaging for the first read. I'm not sure if I'm going to read it again, or when I will read it again. Maybe in if the second one comes out and I actually go and buy the second one, then maybe I'll read the first one again to remind myself of what's going on. It flows by really fast. There's not that much philosophy or what. It's not a dense text. It's an entertaining short novella about a bunch of policemen who try to do the right thing, more or less. And it has a crime scene, it has crime investigation, and it has a bunch of big action scenes. All of those are handled competently, and that's all good. So there we are. If you like that kind of thing, if you enjoy your modern day action movies, or more like your 80s, 90s action movies of cops that sometimes go a bit outside their purview to solve crimes or do the right thing, get into shootouts and all of that, then this might just be the right thing for you. It will at least give you 3 hours and 9 minutes of entertainment on a gray afternoon. If you play it on one speed and not speed it up on your Audible, or 150 pages of reading, so probably a bit less, 2 to 3 hours of reading, and that's good, right? So fair play there. I'm glad that he actually took the plunge to actually write, because as a critic, like me, I've never written anything apart from my computer science thesis, and that one is not exactly, prose, gold prose or anything. Anyway, so apart from that, what I'm trying to say is this is a solid thing. You want to, you're not going to get super bored because it's fast moving. You're not going to get, taxed too hard with the vocabulary. You're not going to get upset by any glaring errors or whatever. So yeah, it's fairly standard, good kind of thing. So if I would give them, ratings, I'd probably rate it a 6.5 to 7 out of 10, something like that. Probably around there. It's in that area. It's something that, it's the equivalent of a movie that you watched on TV when you were a child, you were an adolescent, and you came home slightly drunk and you watched it on repeat on TV in the middle of the night, and you're just like, yeah, it's fun. I'll tune into that kind of thing. It has that level, and I'm good with that. So fair play to you, Daniel. That's cool. So now let's get into the criticism part of it, where I have to be slightly more spoilery. So if you have not read the whole thing yet and want to or don't want to be spoiled, this might just be the point where you want to switch off. All right, so problems with it. There's a few minor, like, technical issues that I have where I'm like, that might have been caught by an editor, hopefully. Really minor things. The first minor thing is that the crime scene is described in a lot of detail, and there's some things that are not exactly necessary. Like, one thing that's not exactly necessary or doesn't make too much sense, and there's one thing that is completely, so there's one thing, they're talking about it, and the one officer goes and explains to the inspectors. Inspectors are bigger than, cooler than, higher ranking than officers, and he explains how many victims are in that crime scene in that manner. And he's like, there's two young noblemen and the family, and the young noblemen were stabbed in their sleep in their beds, and that's that. And I'm like, okay, sure, why not? And then slightly later, they're talking again about it, and they're like, yeah, those two men who were sleeping together. And I'm like, I'm almost sure, I didn't go back and double check, I'm almost sure, like, the first time around, it's like those were in, like, guest rooms and were sleeping because they were guests of the family. Now, do I mind that they were sleeping together? Hell no. It's like, just like, maybe it's an oversight, maybe it actually was something that I overheard because of, like, how the narration was done. It's just like, why jump from the one to the other, or not just go the full way the first time round? It's like, there's two noblemen who were sleeping together and they were stabbed, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. So that, just like, as I said, like a minor, very, very minor irritant that I don't, really care about. It's just like, it could have been, because after that they don't care, they don't matter after that for the rest of the story, or maybe they matter in future novellas, which I don't know. By that point, it's a minor detail that irritated me for a second, because I'm like, why was it, like, said one way and then the other way? It's a pick a side, right? So that's one thing. Another thing that I found problematic, and this is more in the editing kind of thing, and I'd be interested what the critical dragon would say about this kind of thing. So, during the story, our main, like, three protagonists are these three officers. Two of them are husband and wife, and the third one is like this maverick Bruce Willis type of cop. Anyway, and we have it from her perspective, and she and her husband shows back up unexpectedly. She wasn't expecting him back. But at the same time, she mentions that, or it's mentioned that she was kind of pissed that the third one, that Chapman, barged his way into her inspection, and that he, had to fight real hard to get to be also there while everyone else wanted to be there. And then her husband shows up unexpectedly, and he just takes part in the investigation. How does that kind of jurisdiction kind of fucking thing work in that police department? He can just show up because it's his wife and then just work with her on the case. How does that work? Now, does it matter? No, it doesn't matter, right? That's the other thing there. It doesn't really matter, because, spoiler, like, everyone is kind of dead at the end of that thing anyway, or at least out of the police force. So it doesn't matter to talk about the fact that everyone wanted to go there. Chapman, used his clout to get into it, and mentioning that he used his clout to get into it, that is like completely unimportant afterwards. But it makes like, why is Samuel? Quick aside, I'm just like really, I struggled really with the fact that there's a policeman called Sam, because I've read too much Terry Pratchett, I guess. So that was a big problem for me to struggle with. Like, that's personally my personal problem, I guess. Anyway, so why can he just like waltz in there and start taking like investigating as part of the case of the inspectors working on that case, where the other guy had to struggle real hard to get into? That does, irritated me, and I feel like that could have been handled in a better way, because on the other hand, there's still this minor thing that she wasn't expecting him back, and it wouldn't have mattered at all to just go and say that those two were put on the case from the beginning or whatever. So that kind of didn't make a lot of sense and kind of annoyed me there. So there's that. Once again, I feel it's something that could have been handled in all kinds of ways. Or could it just have been avoided? The third thing there that didn't make a lot of sense is she goes to that shed, sees the glass is broken, and there's blood on the windowsill, and the rest of the shed is completely cleaned up. And her logical conclusion is that it was one of the victims jumping in there looking for a weapon and going back into the house to defend himself and then die or whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's one option. But why the fuck doesn't it occur to her that it might just have been the actual perpetrator who goes there, smashes in the window, grabs some kind of weapon? They're talking about a soil knife or whatever, talking about that knife, going into the house and killing everybody. Why does it have to be someone else? Like, that just escaped me, that why they are so certain about it. That's, I guess, the point there. I feel like, and that's the kind of thing that I feel needs to be handled correctly and above board in a crime investigation kind of story, because you need to know where everyone is. Otherwise those conclusions feel like cheats afterwards, right? It's like you as a reader feel cheated when you have your Hercule Poirot whatever, who then draws out this like, yeah, but I know this bit that you didn't know, that you readers didn't know, and that solved the case. And like, having police investigation and police investigators talking, not police investors. Those are the ones that never get investigated. Anyway, so having like police officers talking through their ideas so you as the reader can follow them is great. But having them just coming to a conclusion and not entertaining another one that might just be as plausible, unless they have another piece of evidence that we as the reader don't have, just feels a bit off. So that's something that I don't know, you could just made something up, or maybe I missed something. It is possible that I missed something. I'm just saying that, All right, so there's that. Then there's one bit of character motivation that I'm kind of still struggling with. That is how Clip, whatever her name is, suddenly decides to still trust Chapman. Like, she's apparently a true believer in this whole structure of policemen being the power, being the best thing ever, and God, and thus the ruler of the empire being like perfect and everything, and the rebellion being bad. And then he's like, yeah, also by the way, I'm a rebel, and she wants to actually take him into custody and all of that. And then he just punches her, knocks her out, and he's in uniform, she's not in uniform, and all this stuff. So he manages to actually take her, capture her, knock her out, and drag her home to his place. And then she decides to believe him. Now, I know that's basically Pratchett's narrative causality at work here. It's like, you need that kind of thing. You need the maverick cop to go there. And I'm not too worried about it, but I felt that was like a bit of an issue in the construction there. She was flipping too easily for something that I thought is basically religion, because that's, I feel, is the point there. The point there is that the law and the whole thing, it's basically a theocracy of actual true believers, because it's fantasy, and I don't know fully yet. Well, the emperor or whatever it is, God really is there and is the ruler, and the anointed have superpowers and so forth. So, if you believe in all of that shit, you're a true believer. Why would you switch sides so easily? Now, if all of that was already like a corrupt system, then yeah, sure, no worries. But this way, I don't know. Felt a bit easy. I mean, we're talking about 150 pages, so there could have been like another couple of pages added to the whole thing to make this flip more reasonable, I feel. So yeah, then we get to the big action scene at the warehouse. That one is done, competently, I would say. It's not the best action scene I've ever seen. But it's like described rather cinematically, graphically, and so forth. You can imagine the author sitting there and see, that's the other thing there. Like with every other author, I always use their last name. Like, yeah, Mr. Erickson, Stephen Erickson, or whatever. And with Daniel Greene, it's like I always want to say Daniel, and I feel like that's disrespectful in a way because it means that I'm still treating him as a YouTuber and not as the author, and not as an author in a way. So I'm trying to say Mr. Greene or Daniel Greene. That's why I'm trying. So anyway, so you can just imagine Daniel Greene sitting there and having the whole scene play out in his head like a movie and writing it down how it works like that. All of that works. I felt the evil scientist was a bit too tropey. Like the evil scientist was a bit too on the nose. So, it's not bad, but it's a bit of a cliche, and it was handled in a bit of a very bare bones cliche kind of way. Then you have that bad, evil, or like coming across as evil anointed, who sort of is like, he's an anointed having the true power of God, but he comes across as like a scary clown. Like, now I get the idea that apparently something is really wrong there in that theocracy that is ruled by God, and obviously they're doing something really evil there. I get all of that. Isn't it a bit on the nose to make him like a superpowered evil clown kind of figure with this white mask and the painted on grin and everything? Dude, this is not Terminator Pennywise. Isn't that a bit too much? I don't know. It felt a bit too on the nose and too, like, everyone reading it will immediately see that these guys are evil, and maybe God isn't evil, but at least the theocracy underneath him is very much evil. And it comes across as a bit of like, why doesn't no one in that world realize it if they're dressed as scary clowns? And that's just something that I felt was a bit, I don't know. I mean, this is like the first novella, so maybe there's more stuff coming there's more stuff coming, so maybe things will get clearer in a way, because we don't get that much actual world building. We get a bit of these like things in the beginning. There's this like idea that apparently inspectors have the power to like judge people on the spot and kill them, which gave me fuzzy, warm Judge Dredd vibes in a way. So it's kind of it's kind of a bit like fantasy Judge Dredd in a way. In the way that you might feel like at least the Judge Dredd movie, which is not like the Judge Dredd comics, where Judge Dredd realizes that not everything is perfect in Mega City 1 or whatever that is, right? But anyway, I'm rambling, which I always do. But see, my point was that bit just felt a bit off and a bit too ham-fisted, is the word I was looking for. Yeah, the description of the brothel was a bit too slapstick. Also, it felt like the opening was really cool. Especially that scene in the wine cellar was done really well. I really enjoyed that. That was handled really well. And there's like, what kind of monster is that? Is it a banshee? It sounds like a banshee and all of that. That was handled really well, and then the end felt a bit rushed in that way to me. So there's that. Also, the epilogue felt a bit very formulaic. So that's the point. Is like why I'm not gonna rate it super high or anything. This is a very solid first try. As I said before, it's using a lot of established ideas, structures of a crime fiction action movie kind of mix. All of that is well established, and I feel it's very clever or smart to for a first debut book to actually use something like that and not be overly ambitious and go, whoa, I have this 2,000 page big book that really has all these immense things. No, go something that you can actually achieve. Make it short, make it on point and everything. And that's a really smart way to establish yourself as an author. And I highly respect that, which kind of comes to my other criticism, not criticism. I know it's this like Daniel B. Greene has been out there and has said that this is like the the first novel of three novellas that are sort of the prequels to his novels that have, I don't know, I probably have said how many volumes his novel cycle will have. And all of that feels too structured, too planned to me. Now, there's obviously we come to a very difficult topic here. The point there is, are we talking about this like artistry or the romanticized version of how art is created versus the actual fact of how most of it, which is not what I would call art, but more like craftsmanship, how that works. So that is the big issue that I'm kind of facing here. So the romantic idea of the artist is that the artist has a lot of natural talent. He walks or she walks across some place, sees one thing, and inspiration strikes. A bit like Pratchett uses that with the inspiration particles and so forth. Anyway, inspiration strikes, they sit down, and they create this masterpiece of art. And everything is perfect. And that's obviously not how that works. Art is something, whether it's music or painting or writing or whatever, is something that you need to practice all the fucking time to get good at. A lot of it is about skill. Now, there is talent involved. Your personal feeling for which metaphors work at which place. That's something that you can learn in a way, but you'll always have this that personal aspect in there. And it doesn't even mean that a specific artist is better than another one. It can just mean that you or me as readers, listeners, or whatever, vibe with a specific use of language more than with another's use of language. I find, for example, Stephen King's prose super fucking dull, and I enjoy the prose of Cormac McCarthy. Now, does that mean that Stephen King is a worse writer than Cormac McCarthy? Well, I would argue yes, but not because of their use of language, but it's because of other things. But the point there is, a lot of that is personal taste. On the other hand, planning out a massive concept of a series of stories, side stories, and so forth, I feel oftentimes is a result of the commercialization and propertyization of art and media. Thinking of art as media, I guess, is the issue there. That might just be something that I should ramble on more about in a different place. But it's like the idea that we have, at least since, say, Star Wars, is that if you create a piece of art, and we can maybe call the first 3 Star Wars movies art, or whatever, then you have a property that is so much more than just that piece of art. It's a piece of intellectual property that you then exploit to the fullest. It has side stories that you market in a specific way. It has prequel, sequel, all this stuff. And at some point in the 20th century, we started thinking of a lot of art as an intellectual property. And for me, the absolute epitome of that in the fantasy writing genre is obviously Brandon Sanderson, with his whole not even multiverse kind of thing, where all these stories, the Cosmere is this huge intellectual property where everything has slight connections to each other, so you can market all these things to the fans of another thing and all of that, and it is planned through to the maximum. And a lot of it is done in a way by a very competent writer. Like, I'm not going to say anything here, but by a competent person who knows how to do that. And that's where we come to that art versus craftsmanship. Like, I'm not going to say that those people are bad craftsmen. I'm saying that planning out the whole thing in that meticulous way, with publication and all of that already in mind, is something that I personally struggle with. That's obviously something that I am totally not qualified to talk about, because basically what we're doing is me as a lefty romantic saying that's not how art should work. Also, why do you also think of how to make money off your art? How dare you? You should be sitting at home and rotting in poverty because no one appreciates real art. That's obviously not the case, right? That's not what I mean. But it just feels a bit too constructed, a bit too planned in a way, which, comes back to me not liking these super hard magic systems. I like to be surprised. This feels like I will not be surprised a lot by it in the future. That's one big thing that I feel will prevent me from really, really enjoying future installments of this. The other is that, I don't know, the whole concept of the good cops going against the corruption within the divine empire is a bit too tropey for me. I don't know. It also leaves a bit of a sour taste on a political note with me. I'm gonna end on that one. So basically, my issue is that what we see in a lot of like Hollywood movies, and these kind of crime novels and this kind of fantasy novel as well, is the idea that the structure of law, the structure of laws within a society, apparently is always undermined by corruption, and even policemen who are there to protect everyone and to do good and keep the laws can only do that by actually ignoring the laws, taking the law into their own hands, and going beyond the law and doing basically what you can call, taking the law into their own hands. And that's something that I personally have the feeling might be a slightly dangerous thing if that's basically what we indoctrinate everyone with, because it's all the media that people are fed. It's like our action heroes, whether it's superheroes in comics, whether it's your typical 80s undershirt wearing people, or like white men, or whether it's your fantasy heroes apparently as well, that they can only actually do good, moral good, by ignoring society's laws. And that, I feel, has a undertone that I sometimes feel is problematic and I don't enjoy too much. Do I say that you need to tell stories about how law and order actually work and are good? No, I'm not saying that. I just feel that we have very much, for a lot of reasons, tended towards stories about these people that go beyond the law to do moral good. And I feel that this is sometimes a bit of a problem. So there you have it. Also, once again, Terminator killer clowns are not exactly what I imagine the anointed of God to be in a society where people basically feel that God is good and ruling them. Quick aside about those, quick mentions about police violence and stuff like that. Yeah, they're in there. I don't see them as that much of a problem because, yes, they're not, glorified or anything. It's just the fact that things are like that in that world. It's just bad timing, I guess. That right now, we are more sensitive to things like that being mentioned. So yeah, nothing to add on that one. I think Daniel, now I can say it because it's about his YouTube video, Daniel said everything positive, like he needed to say about authorial intent in that regard in his own video. So there you have it. I was not disappointed. It was by far not the worst book I've ever read. maybe I'll talk about worst books I've ever read at some point. You know, it's not the worst book I've ever read. It's far from the best book I've ever read. For that, it basically has far too few ochre potsherds in it. And yeah, it felt like a quick snack, fast food kind of fantasy crime story. Well done, competently handled. And, you know, for a debut story novella, that's fine. So yeah, I guess 6.5 out of 10 or something like that. All right, tomorrow I'll be back with actual Malazan content, I feel. And until then, have a great evening. I better get back to my Zoom conference. Until then, cheers.